Stephanie Roulic is the founder and lead organizer of StartUp Boston, an organization driven to strengthen the New England startup ecosystem by connecting, educating, and celebrating the people in the tech community. She's also a co-founder of nDash, a CSM at Goldcast, and was named one of Boston Business Journal's Power 50 for 2020.
I live in Quincy, and this is the second place I've lived at in Quincy. And my first place, like, the T-stop was behind my apartment, but in order to get there, you had to do like this 20-minute walk. The minute I move, they made it so that like you could cut across, and they built the bridge over the train track. Like the minute I moved.
Would you have stayed if you had that?
Or no, but I would have liked it for those 3 years.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Without a Roadmap. This is a podcast for product folks who don't have all the answers. My name is Jonas, joined here today with my co-host, Cameron Curry, and really excited to have Stephanie Roulic on the show.
Glad to have you on. I think it actually, before we dive into some of your background, your time at nDash, I think it would be cool to kind of just go over quickly how you and Jonas met, which kind of led us to you being on the podcast today. So why don't one of you take the lead on that?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab, and then if I'm wrong, I'll just be publicly embarraed, so that's cool.
That's okay.
I'm pretty sure Jonas spoke at Startup Week this past September, right? You were on a panel for the product track.
Indeed,
yeah.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys for bringing me on. Definitely a great honor. And I, through that actually have met and connected with a bunch of other folks who are on panels there. Amazing group you guys got going on, and I'm really excited for next year's Startup Boston conference.
I love it. Parties, who's on the Startup Week team with me, she's always talking up your podcast. It literally came up in a conversation that the programming team had about 2 days ago. So, I'm going to have to rope you both in.
Shout out parties. That was
awesome.
That was like my first, I guess I've got this show, but outside of that, and to be asked to join some panel with people who are much more established than I was, it was really cool. Shout out to parties for, really making me comfortable and joining that. And to you.
We'll dive into a little bit about StartUp Boston a little bit later in the podcast. But to start, Stephanie, we wanted to go over your time at nDash. So it would be super awesome if you kind of give us a little overview of what nDash was. And then I think the really interesting part is how you went from a part-time contractor all the way to a co-founder.
Yeah, for sure. So nDash, it's a content marketplace. Basically, it's a SaaS model, matches up brands with writers. They specialize in B2B tech content specifically, because it's usually really difficult to find writers that, can write to coding and all of DevOps and basically everything I personally don't understand. That platform was built to find writers that do that. So I got involved in nDash. It's a little bit of a weird story, but basically I found a job posting on Craigslist back in the day, circa February of 2014. So a few months after I graduated college. And it was for a content manager or marketing manager or something like that. So I interviewed, I got the job, and I was the first hire at this agency called nDash Marketing. And it was a part-time role. I think I made $13, $14 an hour or something like that. And eventually worked my way into a full-time position there a couple months later, which was really exciting. And I helped the CEO of the company, Mike Brown, build an agency from him, all the way up to, I want to say we had 12 full-time employees by the time that the agency kind of, quote, came to an end. And basically, during the time of building the agency, Mike had this idea to build this software platform, which is now what nDash is known for today, which is that content marketplace. So a couple years into the agency, we pivoted the agency and created that software platform, kind of got rid of everyone else who was working at the agency at that time. And then me, him, and our CTO became the 3 co-founders of nDash. And then I had an awesome time building that platform from August 2016 to, I guess, December of 2020 is when I left. So it was a couple years, about 4 years there, which a lot of things happened, a lot of learnings along the way for sure.
Yeah, That's such a cool story. I feel like a lot of people would love to follow that same trajectory. And in particular, I feel like going from, content marketing into kind of building out a customer success team, which is what you did there, and which is, what you're up to today. So I'd love to hear your kind of thoughts from the experience of kind of, being there early on, transitioning to this SaaS model, and really what necessitated that the need for a team that managed kind of the customer success process.
Yeah, so I definitely say made a lot of mistakes on the way. It was my first kind of quote real person job, if you want to say that. So I mean, I did not know what I was doing. I would say in retrospect, just kind of killing the agency and going straight to software and that SaaS layup and forcing clients to adapt with us was a huge mistake. We actually ended up rebuilding our agency about a year in, or maybe 6 months in, somewhere between that, as we created that software platform. And that was because, some clients just didn't want to do it themselves. They wanted that agency feel. So we ended up kind of creating a managed service division, which was one of the things I was responsible there, which was basically replicating what we did at the agency, but using our platform to support those clients. So kind of the same thing, just software enabled. In retrospect, if you were going to pivot, I wouldn't suggest just taking what I would call like the Wild West and just being like, oh, clear break, let's go and do this new plan. I wouldn't do that. If I ever had to pivot again, I would not do it that way. And then in terms of actually building the customer team for nDash, it was a little bit different than what my current experience at my job at Goldcast is right now. And the reason being is because at nDash, we were 100% bootstrapped. We had no funding. So everything that we were doing was really based off of money that our clients were giving us. So I learned how to be super scrappy and to scale up a department without having a budget. And a lot of that came from just automation, good old automation, not having a lot of other personnel. So eventually we did have 2 other people on the team with me, which was really great, who helped support, the client delivery process. But before we did have those 2 people, and even when we did have those 2 people, a lot of it was automated. So that just came down from building out like the help center to coming up with platform notifications that would pop up and onboard clients once they did that, signed up for the freemium model that we had. It was a lot of figuring out what our email automation was supposed to be. I basically had to figure out like, how can I do this if I cannot find many people to kind of handhold and get on calls with new customers all the time. So it was a huge kind of learning curve there. And as a result, I created a customer success track for Startup Boston Week, so everyone could answer all of my questions about how to automate a customer success department. I'm not even kidding. One of our events was literally about that within the first year. That was 2018's conference, all about automation. I was like, someone tell me how to do this.
That's something called free game. That's so awesome that you were able to leverage an entrepreneurial experience with another.
Yeah, it was good. And then when I did find, 2 other people and they joined the team, then it came a lot of, one person was more responsible for kind of, hand holding our managed service clients and running point, very similar to probably what an account management role is at an agency. And the other person, they really helped me kind of tweak the automation process and really get like those calls in the calendars with new clients that want to do the self-serve model. So it ended up being basically like 2 different types of roles, one agency and one more, I think, the standard customer success type of, yeah.
I think it'd be interesting for our audience and also for us is when you made the decision to go to more of that B2B SaaS company and you're giving the responsibility to run the whole customer success function at the company, like where did you think you needed to start? Like what was like your thought process of like, hey, this is like our current state, we have all these agencies who are hopefully going to transfer over to become a customer. Like what's the most important thing that I start with?
Yeah, the most important thing was like, okay, when we're transitioning everyone over, and we did retain a decent amount of clients, I just would have implemented it very differently in retrospect. But the big focus, and I do stand by this focus still, was really being like, how can we go and make this transition smooth? How can we set them up with a similar experience that they're having with us now? Just, you know, making their life a bit easier because we're removing the middleman. And that was what I was really focusing on as we took those standard accounts and transitioned them over to the software experience. Where I went wrong was actually implementing it, but I still stand by the idea. It was just very poorly implemented.
Good intentions.
Yeah, good intentions. But I mean, I was young. I was 26 and I had never done it before. And, you know, unfortunately at that time, Startup Boston Week did not exist yet. So I did not know who to ask. And it's one of the main reasons too why I created Startup Boston was for a moment like that, because I had no idea what I was doing. And I also did not know who to ask in terms of how to even figure it out. I did the cliche trying to reach out to people on LinkedIn that were like, you know, VPs of customer success, directors of customer success. And like, hey, like, can you help me out? Like, I would love to pick your brain for 15 minutes. Everyone ignored me. So it was a lot of just it was poorly executed. There we go. I think if anything, I would have just kept having like the standard accounts, would have grown up a separate self-serve wing. And then once self-serve itself was going well and smoothly and operating the way that ultimately it ended up operating as and how I wanted it to, then I would have like kind of transitioned and introduced this option to our current managed service clients, but I wouldn't have forced them to fit into my box. And that's what we ended up doing, which is where I went wrong. Yeah.
I think it's really cool that you're able to look back and recognize failures. I think it's so important. Like, you know, retros are one of my favorite things. You know, when things go right and when things go wrong, you gather as, you know, all the involved individuals and try and understand what you can learn from it. Because I guess when you look at it that way, all failures aren't the worst thing in the world. But it's so awesome to hear that the kind of, you know, learning process forced you to, you know, build a community where you could more actively engage in these conversations. So we actually just got off, you know, last week with, you know, speaking with Terry Harwood, who is a huge proponent of networking, and, you know, she's a VP of product, but still on the podcast said, if you have any questions, reach out to me and ask me, you know, for help. You know, everybody can benefit from mentorship. I'm curious, how much of that, you know, the inability to find that mentorship, you know, really played a role in the you know, development of this Startup Boston community, and what was your initial intention? Was it that you were going to build a community that would go on for years to come, or was it really that you were trying to find a group of people who you can bounce ideas off of?
No, I actually built it with the intention that this would live on for years and eventually someone else would take it over when I could no longer do it.
Nice.
So I did go into it 100% with that motivation. I also went into it with the intention of this is going to be a conference for the first 2 years and then it's going to become more. Yeah, so that was 100% planned. So I'm really happy. I'm happy that I could execute the plan and it did end up working out. A lot of it was like large wishing on my end, because I mean, you have to figure when I did this, I had no network and I really didn't know anyone in the startup scene. But I was like, you know what, we're going to go for it. We're going to find out, we're going to make these really ridiculous asks of people that don't owe me anything and don't know who I am. And I'm going to see if they're going to speak and I'm going to see if they're going to support it. And I was like, this is what it's going to be. And like, you know, like when you like dream big and you're like, yes, one day it's going to look like this. So I went into it with that kind of intention. And then I was pleasantly surprised when it actually ended up, when the conference actually went well, because I had high hopes for it, but you know, you don't really know if it's going to happen sometimes. You just want it to happen that way. And there's still so much more I could do with Startup Boston as well. And we'll see where that ends up taking. A lot of it's just time and balancing a full-time job and building this, but more and more people are joining the team. So we have 45 people on the team. We're all volunteering to make it happen. So as a result, we can do a lot more too throughout the calendar year, which is really exciting. So you should all volunteer if you're listening to this.
We'll make sure we post the link to volunteer or whatever they need to know.
Thank you.
I got you. I think my next question is kind of similar to my earlier question of like, where did you start when thinking of, hey, I want to do Startup Boston or whatever name you initially had?
Yeah, yeah. It was initially Boston Startup Week, and then we kind of changed it because of the organization name. We couldn't like figure out, like, we're like, how do we name this organization and whatever. That's a whole nother tangent. But in terms of actually starting the conference itself, oh my God. So I actually have, I don't have it, like it's in my desk somewhere, but I still have the piece of paper. It's your normal printer size paper.
You have to frame it.
Oh yeah. And I was like, okay, these are like, you know, what, the 32 things I need to do before September to make this conference happen. And then I just started crossing things off the list as I went through them. And then eventually I found, you know, a couple other people to join the team, which was really great. Because you really need people to put on a conference. It's not like tech where you can just automate everything. There's a huge difference there. So it was really cool when I found a couple other people to help. They joined the team and volunteered their time and kind of, you know, bought into like the overall vision of what this could be for the Boston startup scene, and, you know, really helped to make it a reality, which was huge. But a lot of it just started out with me sitting down one night, honestly, probably with a glass of wine, and writing up a list. Yeah. It was either that or vodka at that point. Yeah, one or the other. And I just wrote up a list, and I was like, okay, well, I know I need venues. I know I need sponsorship. I know I need a sponsorship deck. I know I need event ideas, and I probably need speakers as well. And it was just chipping away and kind of, you know, being a project manager and prioritizing, like, okay, you probably need sponsors first and venues first, and then everything else you can find as you get a bit closer, and kind of working backwards from there. And I was fortunate enough where I had an internship where I did help plan events for 2 months. So during that, I learned a lot as well in terms of like what actually went into the event. But it was my first time running point on really planning the event. So yeah, it was a learning process. I think people should just go for it. If you have an idea, like, worst case, you mess up and then you figure it out again later. I don't know. Right. I feel like that's a better alternative than just not doing it. And I think that's like the big hump people have to get over. Yeah.
Exactly. Was doing this experience of like starting Startup Boston and doing all this yourself and also getting other people involved in the team, was that really helpful as you were leading customer success at nDash? Because you're kind of doing both at the same time and kind of getting the experience and like your little side project that actually became this large successful thing. At the same time, you're working for nDash, trying to build out that whole customer success function.
Yeah, no, it totally, the skills that I learned doing Startup Week and the skills I was building at nDash really supported one another, like a lot. I made a point to draw a very clear line between the two. So Startup Boston, because it is volunteer, I wanted to make sure it had no affiliation with my company nDash, because I really wanted this to be community driven, and I didn't want anyone to ever walk in and take advantage and be like, oh, like this can be like my platform to go and, you know, spam the mailing list of, or whatever it ends up being. So from the very beginning, I made that very clear line because I want it to be its own separate thing. But 100%, like the skills that I was learning, you know, on the event space in terms of talking to large stakeholders such as, you know, Brian Halligan, who spoke at my conference, or Paul Lieberman of DraftKings, who spoke year one, or, you know, talking to Salesforce and asking them to sponsor. Like I was speaking to people that were way out of my league. And I think understanding how to maneuver those conversations there also really helped me with nDash when it came time to do sales and to start talking contracts and money for the actual software company I was creating. So a lot of the skill sets definitely like played a role. And then also in terms of customer success, I mean, I was actually talking to Elise. She's on the customer success team with me here at Goldcast. But I was telling her, I was like, she was a former waitress as well, just like myself. And a lot of it, I always like point back to waitressing. A lot of it is just like understanding like how to manage like high stress situations, how to kind of, you know, chat with customers when they're really upset. And if you can do that and do it well, then you're going to do a great job. It's just like, those to me are like the two biggest things. And I also think they play a direct role when it comes to the event space too, for Startup Boston. So sorry if that was a bit of a tangent. I get really into this.
No, this is your baby. And just to tie it back to customer success, I
Yeah.
totally see the overlap, just being like really detail and task oriented, building relationships. These are all things that you have to do as a customer success manager, as an event planner. And I totally could see why, your background and everything that you've done leading up to it kind of prepared you. You went through, the rings of fire to really, be ready for that opportunity. And I'm glad that, it was a success. And, I'm really curious, which talk or panel in particular got you the most information that you could kind of use at nDash as you're, trying to answer these questions as to how to build the organization out and how to do things.
Yeah. So it was, I forget what the title was. Oh, no, I do. I think it was in 2018's conference. I'm pretty sure it could have been 2019's. There was this woman from Wayfair. She was the moderator for the panel, I think. And the title was like, to automate or not to automate. That is the customer success question, I think was what it was. And it was all about like what you should and shouldn't. And it wasn't, and I know that isn't necessarily so much about team building, but I do think it played a huge role, especially with nDash, that was a bootstrap company, when you had to figure out who you did want to hire and what type of person you want to bring on the team. And if they're going to be more focused on support, more focused on customer success, because those are two different things, or more focused on running point on like the managed services division, because I was really in charge of all three. And understand like what you could automate and like what was acceptable in certain situations at a tech company where it could be a bot responding, or you could point someone to a website page, I think plays a huge role, especially in the startup life when you're trying to figure out like, if you only had money to hire like one person, who's it going to be? And just knowing like what you can do in addition to finding human support was a huge part of the learning. So I created that panel honestly because of that. I needed to know, and it still plays such a huge role in my life now, like with Goldcast. When I joined the team and they do have some funding and they have a really good customer base, and coming in as the first customer success hire and tapping back into like my bootstrapped brain and being like, okay, if we can automate, what can we automate like right now, and then who's like going to be that first hire, was kind of the thought process there too. Is all about like how can you scale it and scale it quickly. And I think even though the human part is incredibly important, automation also plays such a not equally important role, but a huge role as well.
Mm-hmm. I think since we've kind of dug in or briefly mentioned Goldcast here and there, I think it's time to actually dive into that topic. So how about you explain what Goldcast is? Because I think it's probably almost like the perfect opportunity for you and company to join, given your experience, background, and passion.
Yeah, for sure. I can't help but mention Goldcast all the time. I'm on so many calls now for them. It's top of mind. So if my boss is listening, I'm always thinking of this. So for the Goldcast platform, so we're actually a virtual events platform. Honestly, I told my mom, I was like, guess what, Mom? I got a new job. I'm switching what I'm doing in life, shaking it up after a few years. And I was like, Goldcast is a virtual events platform, but the best part is it helps the event organizers actually prove the ROI of their event. And you can get all of this data on a very granular per attendee basis, which is really, really fascinating and important, especially for people like me who organize conferences like Startup Week. And I need to tell my sponsors like, oh, you're going to get X, Y, and Z. And this is how we know that your money actually worked. And now you have like these leads that you have all this other information about. So you're set. So that is what the platform does in a nutshell. And I remember when I told my mom and she was like, this is perfect for you. And I was like, right? It just like lined up perfectly from my Startup Week experience and pivoting that conference last year because of COVID, and having to go through the struggle of figuring out how to create a virtual conference because I had never done that before. And then, customer success for a virtual event platform. Like, this is great. I now get to go and talk to everyone who was in my shoes like this past year as an event organizer and be like, hey, I know what struggles you have. Let's get you set up. And also just being able to talk to these customers day of their event, leading up to the event, and already understand like what's on the line for them and what they want the outcome to be, And firsthand being in their shoes, like not even a year ago, I'm like, got this, let's do it. So I'm having so much fun.
That's so
We
cool.
can tell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get really into it at that point.
Well, I'm glad we were able to plug it. And, if your CEO's listening, this is definitely worth company time. But I'm curious, as product people, a lot of what we have to do is like empathize with the people using our platform. And in a lot of cases, product folks rely on customer facing teams to, do a lot of that work for them. Whether or not that's, the best way forward is another conversation. But given your kind of experience at the crossroads of, being a customer success manager there, but also, having the lived experience of your customers, how have you been leveraging that to kind of improve the product that you're working on?
Yeah, so a lot of what happened when I first came on board, so I am the first person to do customer success at this company, and I am tasked with building out the customer success team, and really figuring out everything regarding like workflows and, the best hands off between sales and here, and then also customer success and product. So when I came on board, basically my first task was like, okay, go through the platform with your event manager eyes and tell us what we need to change in order to make this more user friendly. So I created a very long document. The platform is very, very good, I do want to say, but I'm very picky. So I created a very long document of, even word changes, where pop-ups need to be in the platform to kind of explain something that might not make sense. I started building out their whole help center to, again, support the product. But really my job right now is focused on what do we need to be able to do in the product in order to make this a SaaS model? Because right now we're not SaaS. Right now we're enterprise sales only. So my focus is like looking at this, how can we get people to sign up? And then like in the product, what do we need to improve that makes it more user friendly so that they don't even need to necessarily talk to me if they don't want to. So I work a lot with the product and engineering team in terms of just giving feedback and saying what we need when, and also figuring out like, do we need this now or can we do this 2 months from now? And kind of thinking. And a lot of that just stems from like what conversations I'm having with customers and what seems to be the most commonly asked thing, and kind of working backwards and prioritizing from there. And honestly, it changes like every week based on the more and more conversations we have, because our sales team's really good and we get a lot of new customers, a lot of them on a weekly, if not daily basis right now. So a lot of moving parts, but it's been a lot of fun to honestly enter this company really close to the ground floor because they just launched this summer. So it's still a very young company. They're not even a year old yet. So I'm having a lot of fun figuring it out with them.
That's so exciting. And this is the podcast for, product and customer success at this point, folks who are figuring it out, and you're doing just that. I'm curious for any folks in a similar position as you, customer success or building that team out. What are some of the first things that you think about when trying to kind of formalize and operationalize that unit? Like, are you looking at building, customer journey maps, or is maybe just updating help docs a first order priority? Like, how are you thinking about that, and what are some of the kind of inputs you're taking into account when making those decisions?
Yeah, so well, that's such a loaded question. I'm like, oh my God, let me think about what I've done today. So I know I've only been there for a few weeks and I have to like think back already in terms of what I did when I first joined. So I remember on day one, when I first joined, I was like, okay, we're going to make a really clear line in terms of what customer success is and what customer support was. That was phase one. And then phase two, also on day one, is I made the kind of list of what we could and should automate and what definitely needed a human. And that was like day one of just entering and poking off the platform and being like, this is what I know we need to do out of the gate. This is 100% needed if we're ever going to take a SaaS model. And then from there, a lot of what I've been doing, because it is a newer product, and while I do have an event planning background, I feel like every single there's some basic rules of building tech and basic rules of building a customer success team, right? And then a lot of it, and then some of it changes based on what the actual product is. So my big focus to date has been like, okay, in terms of like the email follow-ups when people first like sign up, what does that like, what is our eventual automated email workflow going to look like? Because a lot of it just depends on wording and figuring out like out of the gate, like honestly for these onboardings, I kind of change it a little bit each time I do a new customer because I'm trying to figure out what resonates and what doesn't resonate, with the ultimate goal of like, I'm going to be onboarding this email process and this, I'm going to be onboarding or automating, this process. So like, what can I do that's going to help them get to the next step if I am not there? Does that make sense? Okay, cool. Sorry, words today.
No worries.
So that's like been like a huge focus of mine right now. But then it's also coming down to trying to figure out like, how do I measure the customer health? Like, how do I know once they've closed the deal, like how often I'm supposed to check in? How do I know, if they're happy with the platform or if they're angry? Because sometimes people are really difficult to read. And customer health right now, like the first 5 weeks are focused on what I just mentioned. And now going forward, it's like, how do I know when people are truly happy and when they're not? And at this point in my life, I'm looking at software such as Quala. They're kind of, one of my favorites so far. So shout out to them. But we're probably going to be using something really similar to that to start, triggering those platform notifications to let me and the team know like, oh, so-and-so is doing X or so-and-so has not done Y for a while. But that's like the big focus point currently. So it's kind of, I hope that answers your questions. It's like a lot of moving hats, I guess. And I'm trying to break it down, and I have this habit of rambling. So
no worries.
There we go.
We just got an insight into the mind of a person who is trying to start a, customer success organization.
Right.
Like, here's everything that's on my mind, guys. Do you want to help me?
Yeah, we're always here to help. I think you mentioned one point that I want to hit on before we wrap this up is, well, you mentioned two things. So one is that your sales team is doing a really good job of getting new customers. And then you also mentioned like what happens once the deal becomes closed won and they actually become a customer. Like how, I think one important topic within customer success is obviously that sales to CS handoff. And so I want to hear about like your thought process of like how that is working for Goldcast and like what's worked well for you currently and in the past too.
Yeah. So when I first joined, we didn't have a CRM set up. We have to figure like this is a very small, agile company and they move super, super fast. So on day one, I also set up the CRM and was like, this is how we're going to track the handoff between sales and customer success. And I only knew about that honestly because of my time at nDash. I learned a lot of things that I could bring over, which was really great. So in terms of best practices for that, one, have that CRM or whatever works for you so that you know exactly what's coming through the pipeline and what their contract is, because that is point number one. And then point number two is, I always get warm intros made via the sales team. They always intro me. The sales team also will check in with the customer a couple weeks into their onboarding process. And that way there's two different people reaching out. So that way, if for some reason the customer is upset about something but doesn't want to tell me because maybe they don't want to hurt my feelings, or maybe they don't like me but don't want to tell me that, it's really important though to have that other person to reach out and be like, hey, are you happy with everything so far? And Kishore, who's one of our co-founders here and runs sales too, he does an excellent job at doing that. He'll kind of check in with people, 3 weeks into that and be like, hey, I know you've been up and running with Stephanie. It sounds like you have this event that you're planning for X date. Like, how's everything going? And I think it's really good for customer success to have that healthy relationship with sales, because sometimes someone just won't want to tell you something to your face, but they'll tell it to someone else. And I think the big thing to always remember is that you're a team. And as long as someone gets that information from your customer, like, you're all going to win at it. It's just really, really, really important to know so that you can fix it. Because if it is a you problem, I would rather know and make someone else the point person and still keep the customer than lose them. So it's kind of just understanding that you're a team, and if the customer's happy, you're all winning, and whoever it is that's okay. It's kind of, I guess, the takeaway, but that's been kind of what we've done to date. So again, like the warm intro, keeping everything in one central location, but still having sales check in down the road to make sure that, you know, their deal is happy with us.
Yeah. Last quick question on the kind of topic of checking in with your customers, seeing whether or not they're happy. I'm curious, for, you know, your CS background, are you a fan of NPS?
I am so bad at that. I'm not going to lie. I am so bad. I need to get better. I need to get better at analytics. On StartUp Boston, Christine Zimmerman, who does marketing, she loves it. She's really good at understanding that and setting it up. And it is something, full disclosure, I need to learn and work on. So yes, always room to learn more and grow, guys.
Indeed. Indeed. Well, with that,
you can put that in the podcast too. Let people know I don't know. That's fine.
The funny thing is, like, there's actually like a huge debate whether or not NPS is actually a valuable like metric or, you know, way to track customer health. Like, somebody could be having a great experience with your product and, you know, just maybe had, you know, one slow loading page and gets the NPS survey right after that and says like, hey, 0, you suck. And
it's,
you know,
Yelp.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, you know, you're most of the time you're going to hear some, you know, just negative feedback that, you know, otherwise you probably could have avoided by just talking to them. But it's a easy way to gain, you know, kind of, you know, insights at scale. And
yeah.
I think, you know,
I mean,
overall,
I would still do it. I'm just really bad at executing it, but I would still do it if I did get good at executing it. Well, I think of conferences. Whenever I do send out, like when Christine sends out the NPS score, the people that always respond, it's a very small amount. You know, we have 4,000 people that show up and you only get like 50 responses. And those 50 are the people that hated one thing about the event. So there you go.
Fair enough.
Well, without further ado, Stephanie, love having you on the show and dropping some knowledge and giving us some free game as well. We'll make sure everyone's has access to all the StartUp Boston stuff so that they can volunteer or they can just keep themselves in the loop on the next events or any other events you're planning in the short-coming year or for the big conference when you do it again in September. And then for all of our listeners, make sure you like and subscribe.